All right, we are live. Tonight, I am so glad to have Duck River Honey on here. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself and what yeah, what you do and where you're at?
All right. Well, I live in Middle Tennessee. I'm a beekeeper. I've got two young kids and a wife. I grew up on the farm that I'm sitting on right now. My family's been in the same spot since 1812, so got a lot of family history here. Grew up on, we had everything you can imagine: ducks and geese and chickens and donkeys and horses and cattle and sheep and goats and pigs and just all sorts of stuff. So I think it was a great way to grow up. Really
Yeah,
good way to grow up.
absolutely. I actually, I didn't grow up on a farm. I've lived on my grandparents' farm for a couple of years, but I've also been really involved with agriculture, and it's definitely an experience, and in a lot of good ways, for sure.
You smell things that other people don't, and you learn things that other people don't.
Yeah, my friends, they were talking about getting jobs when they were about 13 years old, and I was thinking it's not really how it went for me. Like I started working on the farm and at the farm stand when I was like 6 or 7 years old,
Yeah.
and it's definitely there's a certain amount of context and just experience that you get that's just different than anything else. I feel like.
You know, I grew up on a party line. I'm one of the last generation that would have experienced a party line. So, there were 6 or 8 houses all on the same
Yeah.
phone number when I was growing up.
Wow.
And I remember my brother and I would get up about 4 in the morning. We would run a mile-long trap line, and then we would go and break ice for the cattle in the troughs and feed our show steers, and then go home,
Yeah.
take showers, get breakfast, and when we got on the school bus for our hour-long school ride to school, it would be getting daylight and the rooster would start crowing. And there's not many kids that get to do that these days. My kids don't get to do that, and
Yeah.
I kind of wish they could.
Yeah. For me, like the farm, my grandparents' farm's only been in the family for about 30 years old. Like my mom moved there when she was like 5 or 6 years old, and so it's not as historic as yours, but um, it's she definitely has a lot of memories of back when she was just a kid there. And I we even though I didn't live in Maine till I was like 7 or 8 years old, we'd still fly up here, and I'd have such good memories of the farm when I was a really little kid.
Yeah.
So let's get into some questions here. Um, um, so so let's just start with the basics here. How did you get started in beekeeping?
I had no idea I was going to be a beekeeper. Nobody around me was. Well, I had some neighbors behind me that were beekeepers,
Yeah,
but I'd been out of agriculture for a long time, and I
yeah,
wanted to do something in agriculture. And I was looking at getting into cattle again because I just love cattle. I grew up showing steers and heifers in 4-H and continued that into college, and was sort of a steer jock
yeah,
for a while. And I really wanted to get into cattle, and I was thinking, all right, we've got 120 acres, and I'm going to have to fence that because the fences are run down. I need a hay
yeah,
barn. I need working chutes. I need to get about 30 head of cattle, all for this hobby that I wanted
yeah,
to have. And I'm like, I'm going to have to spend $150,000 minimum to be able to make anything. And, the payback on that is just
yeah,
going to be ridiculous. And I'm a big hunter and fisherman, and
yeah.
I'm interested in native habitat and, wildlife habitat and all this. So I was talking to somebody and they said, you should look at bees. You can manage your property for honeybees, and it's really good for wildlife too.
Yeah.
Um, and I started looking at it, and I was like, okay, I'll get some bees. So I got 4 packages, and I think 2 of those ended up dying. And then I started learning about swarm trapping and caught like 9 or 10 or 12 swarms that first year, and
That's
went into winter with I think 9 hives, and then grew to 22 or 23, and grew to 40, and now I'm trying to grow to 120 to 150 and do it full time. So
Yeah.
I just, like I was 39 years old. I'd never been in a beehive,
Yeah.
and absolutely fell in love with it. And just
Yep.
it makes me think for my kids that I need to expose them to so many different things when they're young, because you just never know when you're going to find that one thing that is just amazing for you that you never expected.
Yeah.
So, if you told me 5 years ago that I was going to be a beekeeper at this size and scale, I would think you were nuts. Just
Yeah.
absolutely nuts.
Yep. I mean, it doesn't shock me. I mean, beekeeping, uh, it's, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't other hobbies that are obsessive, but I mean, that's one of its core tenets. I feel like some people just when they start doing it, they just can't get their hands out of the hive. They just love it. And, I think it's the case for a lot of them, me and you both. I don't think it matters how old you are, there's something magical about it.
Well, it to me, it's like I'm cracking the atmosphere on an alien civilization and looking down at them, and I'm the only one that gets to see them,
Yeah.
and understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. It's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, there can be interesting or entertaining parts. I've taken care of some smaller animals, chickens or pigs and other stuff, and grown plenty of tomatoes. But there's something different about it. It's a lot different than those things.
Yeah.
All right, so I figured we'd talk about, you mentioned you wanted to get up to about 100, 120 to 150 hives this year. So what are your whoops, wrong one. But what are your goals for this year, this beekeeping season?
Um, this is going to sound facetious, but it's true. Goal number one would be not to lose too much money. It's really easy to spend more than you bring in when you're
Yeah,
in a situation I'm in. So I've got to be very cognizant of that and
yeah,
careful. The situation I'm in, my job laid me off in January. I found out about it,
yeah,
and there's some things that have worked out well with that. But I'm really at what I think is a minimum viable situation. I wish that this had happened next year, and then I would feel
yeah,
a lot better about it.
yeah,
If I didn't have my honey house almost done to where I can get that in
yeah,
place, and I didn't have 40 hives under me, I don't think there'd be any way that I would bite this off. I would be looking for another job.
yeah.
So that's goal number one, and then scale. It's just scale, woodenware, equipment,
That's
trying to
yeah,
trying to get to a point where I can grow enough to be sustainable and healthy long term.
yeah,
And I think it's doable for me to get to that 120, 150 level, and then next year double up. And at that point, I'll feel a lot better. If I can get there, then I'll feel a lot better about things. It's going to be painful though.
yeah. I mean, uh came in, he's talked in his videos about when he was starting early on. He's like, yeah, I'm really blessed to be where I'm at now, but you don't know how many 80-hour weeks I worked and how many hours I spent in the bees and then also picking up a trucking job. So I think to make your own business work, there's definitely a lot of sacrifice in it as well.
Well, this is really the second startup I've been a part of, and this one was
Yeah,
more painful than I expected this one to be. So
yeah,
that was it was a lot of adversity, but it was good experience. It was 3 to 5 years before that one took off, and I was working part-time jobs and doing all kinds of stuff. So, but it finally took off. So
yeah,
I learned a lot from that. Learned a lot from it.
yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any better teacher than experience, right? I mean, um so thought we would talk about, I have some topics here. Just start from the top here. So in your videos, I don't know if you picked this up from Bob Binney. I'm pretty sure you talk about drone flooding yards. I feel like this is really
Hmm.
underrated, and a lot of beekeepers don't talk about this at all. Wasn't on my radar at all until I, saw 10 seconds in a Bob Binney video about it. But um, So how will you be using drone flooding yards, and quick explanation on what they are, to influence your queen mating?
Well, this is not me. This is me listening to people that are a lot smarter than I am.
Yeah.
Ian Stepler, I see that he's on here. He uses
Yeah.
drone flooding yards. Bob uses drone flooding yards. I know that Chris Werner does. I know that
Yeah.
who's the fellow with data? Ray Latner. He uses drone flooding
Yeah.
yards. So through all of those, you learn
Yeah.
that drone will typically fly about a quarter to a half mile from a
Yeah.
hive, and then a virgin queen will fly a mile to a mile and a half from a hive. And the reason for that is the virgin queen doesn't want to mate with one of her brothers.
Yeah.
So it's designed to prevent inbreeding. So if you've got a mating yard and you surround it on 3 sides or 4 sides a mile away with
Yeah.
strong yards of bees that you like, then you can begin to control your drone sources, and you're making sure that you've got plentiful drones for the amount of queens you're trying to mate.
Yeah.
And Bob Benny did an interview with Keith Delaplane about
Yeah.
polyandry, showing that while on average a queen may mate with 10 to 20 drones, and that's
Yeah.
acceptable, if you can get more matings into that queen,
That's better. Yeah.
the hive is going to be stronger and more resilient, because it's like a form of heterosis, hybrid vigor.
Yeah.
And I am just trying to build on that. So, my 40 or 41 hives are almost all concentrated now in 3 yards. I brought everybody home except the ones that are really feisty. And
Yeah.
I just don't want to breed to the really feisty ones. So I've got 3 at an out yard that I don't like those. So I'm not going to breed to them. And then everybody else is in my drone flooding yards. And when I get my splits done, I'll drop them in the center of these 3 yards and just hope that I get good mating. And then in the future, I will start culling through my hives a lot more as I get a bigger chunk of hives that I can work with.
Yep.
Then I'll be able to pick the ones that I don't like out and bring the ones that I do like in, and hopefully control my genetics. One more thing I'll say about this is the numbers of support colonies per virgin. Bob did a video and he mentioned that I think he was breeding 400 virgins and he had 100 support colonies.
Yeah.
So that would be a 4 to 1. And then the Ray Latner interview he did, I think Ray was breeding like 400 and he had 2,000 colonies within a 2 square mile radius or something, which is just crazy. So I don't know what the right number is on that. Somebody smarter than me probably does, but
Yeah.
if you've got one strong colony for every 4 virgins, that's probably viable.
So when you say 400, you mean 400 throughout the season, or 400 going out from one round?
I think Bob was breeding 400 in one round, each
Okay.
round probably.
That makes me feel a little bit better about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to have about 10 hives in those 2 drone flooding yards that I'm going to use, and I'm going to be sending out about 40 queens at my maximum. So I think that'll be just about right then.
Yeah, I'll have close to 40 hives in my drone flooding yards, and I'll probably try to breed somewhere around 100 queens the first and second go rounds, because I'm
Yeah.
going to be picking up 25 virgins from Corey
Yep.
Stevens, and I've got to get them well mated too. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to Bob about this last week on the live chat, and he was talking about, I'd heard a story from my state bee inspector that, there's commercial operation that, trucks their bees to Georgia in the winter and then back to Maine during the summer. And they had 98% of the queen cells, once they dropped them in, 98% of them came back from their mating flights and started laying eggs. And that, I'm assuming that was very, very good, because that's counting all your queen cell culls, which must be at least a small percentage anyways.
Yeah.
And Bob was saying that was very impressive, and I would have to agree. Hopefully I'm not misremembering, but the point being, he said he got about 95%, and he was saying that he thinks that's partly due to, he said that only 10 to 15% of when they did a test, 10 to 15% of the sperm from the queens were from drones in the same yard as the queens were, leaving from.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, so he had like 20 colonies or 40 colonies where the cells were leaving, and then also 3 yards around his, and you got 95%, which, I mean, the amount of money you're going to make compared to your average 75%, I would imagine that's a pretty good deal to get 20% more queens.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I mean, like even on my small scale, if I got 95% rather than I'm hoping for 80 or 85, that's the difference of even 20 queens for me alone. And so I wonder how much the commercial beekeepers do it, or how many of them do it, because it does seem like something that would make your queen rearing operation more viable.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I think weather and wind and stuff has a lot to do with mating success on
yeah.
virgins, and that's something that you just can't really control.
Nope.
Um,
Not at all. All right. So you briefly touched on this, but I thought you could expand on that point, being you left all your feisty hives away, so
mhm.
they didn't get into your drone pool. So one of your videos, you also talked about breeding for mite resistance. So could you explain that a little bit more in greater detail?
Yeah, I have got this hypothesis that testing is the key to Varroa progress long term. We've got to have easier testing methods. So what I'm doing is I'm setting my hives up on screen bottom boards and then shooting oxalic acid vaporization over a sticky board. Basically, I'm not even using the
Yeah.
sticky anything because dead mites don't move. You don't have to have
Yeah.
sticky to count them. So I get this big mite drop,
Yep.
and I don't know how many bees are in the colony when I do this, so I can't get a percentage. But I can look
Yeah.
at the board and say, there it's a big colony, there's a lot of mites, or it's a small
Yeah.
colony, there's a lot of mites, and I can grade them out. Just put a push pin in the back, say I don't want these guys, I don't like it, and they need to have IPM implemented. They need a further treatment regimen,
Yeah.
and the ones that if I get some that consistently don't need further measures in IPM,
Yeah.
then I think I'm going to go to a second tier testing regimen. I'm going down to Corey Stevens' place, or
Yep.
up to Corey Stevens' place in April to learn the Harbo assay that he's
Yep.
using. And he's also going to be testing Kara Wagner's UBO, unhealthy brood odor
Yep.
spray method this year. So those between those two things, I think I could pretty easily implement a second tiered strategy where I do the first tier, which is the oxalic acid vaporization, and kick a bunch of hives out of the program because they've got too many mites. And then the ones that don't have many, I do a Harbo assay or a UBO assay on them
Yep.
and see if they are actually hygienic. If they are, then those will become my breeders that I graft from. And then I can take my other good producers or my other good scorers and
Yeah.
populate my drone flooding yards the following season with them. So I'm breeding my best to my good, and you got to understand that's not the only thing I'm looking at. Like I'm looking
Yeah.
at mites, aggression, behavior, and then honey production, which I think swarming tendency is a function of that. So I'm looking for hives that don't want to swarm just an excessive amount. They're gentle and nice to work with. They don't build a ton of cross comb, and they're not annoying to work.
Yeah.
But the mite piece of the puzzle is pretty important. So that's
Yeah.
going to carry a lot of weight.
Yeah. I mean that in you said, swarming, if your bees make a lot of honey, that's also you might be breeding for less swarming. I think also in the same case it's with mites, because healthier bees, I think it was like bees with PMS, parasitic mite syndrome, make 25% less honey or something like that. And I
Yeah.
don't even know if it had to be that bad of an infestation to make that much an effect on your honey crop. I mean, it destroys the bees and, shortens all of their lifespans. And in the long run, yeah, I was watching a video with Bruce's Bees and Gus today, Gus Mitchell,
Mm-hmm.
and he was talking about just what you said, which was when he's he finds all of his breeder colonies, tests them out, decide which one's his favorite, and then all of the seconds, the not the absolute best, but his favorites get all. He sticks the green drone combs into, and make
Yeah.
sure that he gets his great paired with at least good, aiming to get more good drones out there for his queens.
Yep.
So I
I,
think
I
that
think I think that's an interesting thing to do, and I've got this weird personality where I've got to be interested in something to do it really
yeah,
well. And I think I could really get into queen breeding, not
yeah,
not just queen producing, but queen
yeah,
breeding and looking for genetics that I really like and trying to manage that. You know, there's different ways to make money with bees, and that's one of them. You can
yeah,
basically make purebred stock or a stock that people find attractive and want to pay for. And
absolutely.
I think I could really get into that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more in the production phase, but I'm moving towards the breeding. I sold, I don't know, it was 30 queens last year, but I'll sell 40 this year and more each year. But um, like compared to making honey, like I just find it a lot more interesting for me. Like it may be honey a lot more interesting once I have a better extracting setup. But for right now, I would definitely be I definitely enjoy queen rearing more, even though it can be very frustrating at times than to honey production.
Yeah, honey can be a lot of work. I enjoy it, but it can be a lot sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a lot of work, but it's also probably on average 10 plus degrees cooler and 20% less humidity here than it is there. So I can't, hard for me to imagine how tough some of those days must be.
Yeah,
Because, I mean, we get some days in the 90s every summer, but the vast majority of days are not over 90 degrees. And most of the time, we don't have really high humidity. We get about
yeah,
50 inches of rain per year. So it's not super wet here.
it's interesting.
Anyways, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, it's beekeeping is so regional. Like I feel like there are always concepts that apply everywhere, but there's always so many details that are important to your specific place.
Yeah, well, your bees are going to be a lot different from my bees because
Yeah,
your climate is a lot different from mine.
yeah. It makes me wonder. So, like, I'm also buying some of Corey's Virgin Queens, and so I'm gonna see how those, Missouri used to warmer weather bees do up here. I mean, I've had some, people buy stock from the South all the time and ship it up here, in the
Yeah,
form of packages in the spring. But like there's a queen breeder a couple hours north of me, and he bought some of Corey's virgins last summer, or he has been in prior years. And he was talking about it. They were like, yeah, all of them are alive so far. They're all in little nukes. Here, it got to negative 65 degrees today, but all these,
goodness.
Missouri queens are still alive in there.
Yeah,
It's like it's hard to even imagine like here where I lived with wind chill, it got to about a negative 40, but way up near the Canadian border, it was up to negative 80 degrees. That was a few weeks ago. It was like a month ago.
goodness,
Yeah. I
that's
don't
cold.
actually, it was very cold. I don't think I actually lost any bees from that storm. I think they died. I lost, three colonies out of my 18. And I think all of them were actually before that storm, funnily enough,
Hmm.
but none of them died during the storm. Yeah, here we go. So I'm, as you are, pretty fascinated with queen rearing and all of that. So you wanted to get into it last summer, but you weren't able to. And
Hmm.
so I thought we'd also touch on your queen rearing. Is there any kind of strategy you're planning on, like cell builder, starter finisher kind of thing?
I'm gonna try not to screw it up too bad.
You
that's
don't need
that's
to
the
explain the
main
whole
goal.
process, but just give a couple.
I'm going to be using Chris Werner, Bob Benny's
Yeah,
system with a double screen, queen right starter finisher. So you make
yeah,
them make the bottom queenless, have the queen on top, and then put the queenless portion back on top over an excluder and let them finish them out. So I'll probably get 2 of those set up and try to get 50 or 60 to take. And looking at this, I know I'm going to have a percentage of failure, a percentage
Yeah.
that just don't take. 90-95% is pretty good. I don't know that I'll get that because I don't have the experience.
Yeah.
And then I think Bob said that he always shoots for about, if you need uh, 100 queens, you make 75% more than that. And that covers mating and just stuff that doesn't work out. So if I need 40, I need to make 50, 53, something like that. I'm looking at doing a first round and then getting Corey Stevens versions in, and I'm hoping that'll be April. It'd be great if I could bring them home when I go
Yeah.
visit him and not pay overnight shipping, but I understand if it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
And then I'll probably do a third round. I would love to make some after solstice queens and
Yeah.
kind of keep them small in a queen, just in a nuke, and overwinter them
Yeah.
as a small nuke, because that gives you somewhere to fill in unproductive spots. It also gives you somewhere to um, give your excess brood to in the spring. Like I'm having that trouble this year. I've got
Yeah.
excess brood. What do I do with it? I don't have enough small hives to give it to. So I'm
Yeah.
just throwing comb at these hives and trying to slow them down until I can get them split. So I think those are really useful. And I think by
Yeah.
splitting it up into 2 or 3 different time frames, that kind of alleviates some of that mating weather, some of the trouble
Yeah.
you can have with that. Like if you get 2 weeks of cold, rainy weather while your queens are supposed to be mating, you're kind of
Yeah.
screwed at that point.
Yeah.
You may as well start over. So
Yeah. I mean, too bad. Beekeepers wish they could control the weather. I mean, I could really use it sometimes, but that's not how it is.
but
And yeah,
if we could, would it be any fun?
it's true.
There wouldn't
That's
be
part
any
of
challenge in it if you
yeah,
could control the weather.
it's true. No. That's part of the game. That's part of what makes it so fun. You're always gambling a little bit, not with poker chips, but with bees.
Yeah.
And with like spreading out your rounds of grafting, that way you don't put all your eggs in one basket. Like I think that was what you're getting at, is if you have that one bad week or week and a half of mating weather that goes south, you said you're going to graft 2 or 3 times, or you're just going to, or yeah,
Yeah.
2 or 3 times. And are you going to wait, are you going to go like um March 15th and then April 5th and April 25th? Are you going to do it closer intervals?
What
Are
what
you,
Well, what I would like to do is shoot for somewhere around March 15th to graft, and then that's going to put me at the end of March, 1st of
yep,
April to do my first split. And hopefully our swarm season really starts the 1st of April usually, but it may be
yeah,
early this year. I think I've got them slowed down enough that it's not going to be too much of a problem, and I
yeah,
can make it till then. But boy, the bees are really humming along. They're
yeah,
really getting, some of them are getting big. And
big,
so anyway, that's my plan. Do that first split as a swarm relief measure, and also make a bunch of queens and get nuke started, and then get my Stevens queens and make more splits, which should relieve any more swarming pressure that I have, and then get into the honey flow.
yeah,
And that will relieve a lot of swarming pressure because it gives them all something to do.
yeah,
And then get at least part way through the honey flow and maybe do a third round and just bring my
yeah,
numbers up to where I want them to be, or get completely through the honey flow and see which ones still have a really good population and just split them down and use those bees instead of letting them all die. And instead of letting them dwindle down to a
yeah,
fall
yeah. I
pop,
know what you mean. Yeah,
fall population, just use them and start more nukes with them. So that's sort of what I'm hoping for. I think it'll work out. We'll see.
so you're not doing mating nukes, you're just making splits and then making more splits to drop your next rounds, successive rounds of cells into.
I'm not making. I'm going to make a first round of queens and make
Yep,
splits for those,
Yeah.
And then I'm going to be getting some virgins from Corey, so I'll make splits
Okay.
for
Yeah.
his virgins.
Yeah.
And who knows? I may split my splits depending on timing and how they're
Yeah.
doing. I'll just pull brood from wherever I think I should at that point, and resources and get those made.
How big are you planning to make your splits?
That's a good question. Um,
Yeah.
I am really thinking. I've got most of my production colonies into 4 mediums right now. I've got one into 5 mediums already,
Wow.
and they're big and really really going. And I am thinking, man, wouldn't it be cool if I could pull a double medium split, get it requeen, maybe stick a double screen between it, and do like a queen cell in each, and
Yeah.
then combine them or whatever. But if I could get some of these splits made that are really strong, I could get them ready in time for the flow. Put an excluder over the top of them and make honey on my splits if they're strong enough, and then do the same thing with my production colony. Pull them down to two
Yeah.
boxes and stick an excluder on them and honey super on the top, and just manage them so they don't swarm. Equalize them out into the nukes and all this so they don't swarm. But I could go into the honey flow with a good number of hives with excluders in a double medium, and the I think the problem with that is I'm going to
Yeah.
run out of drawn comb.
Yeah.
I just don't have enough drawn comb because those queens that have overwintered are going to be more likely to swarm. And I just don't think I can stick foundations on them until we get into the flow. But queens that I'm this year, I could stick foundations on them, and they're probably not going to swarm if I
Less
give them
likely.
enough
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
You're always playing the numbers
So,
game as a beekeeper. You know.
well, I'm almost too flexible in my thinking. Like I can
Yeah.
change my mind 5 times in 3 minutes. And I guess that's a bad thing. I don't know, but in beekeeping, it also almost seems like a strength because I'm not too rigid. I can
Yeah.
react pretty quickly to whatever's happening and try to figure something out that I think makes sense. So,
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many times my plan has changed this winter when I'm thinking about it. Each time it gets a little bit more advanced and a little bit different, but each layer of complexity, and everything. I plan. I've got 6 months of winter. I've got 6 months where I'm not in the bees at all. Like I do my last inspections normally the last Saturday in September, and if I'm lucky, I get into the bees in early April, but for sure by May. And so I got 6 months to just ponder bees, and uh, I always make up a pretty long and complex plan. A huge equipment list.
yeah.
Going crazy, and then you get into the summer, and not that nothing goes right, but often a lot of things don't go right, and you could have just never planned for it. There's no way for you to ever know that was going to happen.
Was it Mike Tyson that said that every fighter has a plan until he gets punched in the mouth?
I haven't heard that quote, but that's a good one. I've not heard
Yeah,
that. No.
I think it was him that said that. So things change based on the circumstances, and I think they should. If you don't change based on circumstances, then you're just going to get burned.
Yep. And you were talking about how you have so much brood, you having to change your plan. Well, at least modify it somewhat to accommodate your bees growing so fast. And it reminds me, Bob put out a video last Sunday all about that. And he's like, just too much brood. And everyone's like,
Yeah,
oh, you're just complaining about, those aren't most people's problems. Why are you complaining about having too much brood? But, everything
it
presents
it
its
is
own
a
challenge.
it is a problem if you don't have queens to make splits with, and you're not going to have queens for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Then hives could set up to swarm in that amount of time. So it's a concern.
Yeah.
Sure is. You're also getting your mite population started earlier in the
Earlier
year,
in the year. Yeah.
which can create a problem later in early summer. So yeah, it's things you have to know, and the learning curve on that stuff's pretty steep. Bob's at the top of it though. So. I watch
Yeah.
I watch him, and I consider Bob a friend. I really do.
Yeah.
He and I get along really well, and boy, I'm just amazed at how much he knows. Absolutely
Yeah.
amazed.
You definitely would not be the only one. Myself and many, many others. I mean, it's hard to put into words how much he knows. I mean, he'll talk to you for hours, and he'd probably still have days more of bee information to tell you because he just knows so much. He doesn't like being called King Bob, but I think there's some merit to it.
I think I may be responsible for popularizing that. When I did the Honey House series of videos, I
Yeah,
asked him some funny questions,
yeah,
and I asked him who his favorite cartoon character was, and he
yeah,
said King Bob. I think that may be where that where that came from.
yeah.
I
Bob can
hate it
thank
for
you.
him.
Bob can thank you later for that.
Yeah, I'm sure he will.
Well, I mean, how couldn't you? So, one of the things that I find so interesting about your videos is, I want to be a commercial beekeeper someday. It's not going to be in the next 2 years or anything, but that's my eventual goal. And I feel like you are able to articulate really well what you're doing and why you're doing it with your business. So, how are you taking your sideline bee operation and turning it to a full-time job?
Hmm. I could talk about this for a while.
Yeah,
First of all, I'd like to say why I'm doing it.
yeah,
Obviously, I got laid off at the beginning of the year. I could go find another job somewhere, but my wife works full time. She's got a good job, and she's very rigid in her schedule.
yeah,
And I have been working from home for years and have been pretty flexible, so I can pick my kids up and manage that sort of stuff. So
makes sense.
that and I am passionate about beekeeping. I've learned that I've got this personality where I've got to be passionate about something to be good
Yeah,
at it. I am obsessive about things. I get engrossed in them
yeah,
and take it as far as you can possibly take it. But if I am not interested in something, you would have to beat me with a stick to make me do it every day. It's painful to make me do something I don't want to do. I just
yeah,
can't make myself. So I love beekeeping. I want to do that. I think I
yeah,
can do it. I think I've got the experience, the education, the ability. Um, and how I'm doing it is I am just trying to grow my cash flow as cheaply as I possibly can. So here in Tennessee, above 1,800 pounds of honey production, I've got to have an inspected honey house. So
mm,
I'm building a
yeah,
honey house out of a shipping container because that's the cheapest way I can figure out how to do it. And
yep,
that will allow me to legally grow my supply and
yeah,
legally grow my customer base. I could Once I get permitted, I can buy honey from other local producers. I can sell honey into grocery stores and be completely
yep,
legal at that. And that is it's the cheapest way for me to get the repeatable, safe cash flow that
yeah.
will allow me to grow further. Growing further would be building a building here on the farm. And then if I grew beyond that, I'd be looking at a commercial location. So I'm trying to be smart about it and put money into,
The right things, yeah.
um, well, I'm trying to put money into income generation, like hives and the honey house, which will allow me to grow. And,
Yeah,
past that, it's going to be trying to get into grocery stores. That's a big thing I'm looking at. Um, that's a tough thing too. The application processes and things can
yeah,
be lengthy and difficult, but that's where I've got to go if I really want to grow with a good margin. So that's the sort of stuff I'm looking at. I'm also looking at interesting niche things like
yeah,
there's a lot of things that you can do. You can market honey as wedding favors.
yeah,
Uh, Bob and Jill's wedding.
yeah,
Little 1 ounce jar of honey. You can label it for them and
yeah,
make a really good margin on that stuff. I heard of somebody give a talk on honey marketing, and she was selling honey in hotel rooms.
yeah,
Like it was part of the food service. She had a 1 ounce jar of honey with her label on it that was going to food service. So there's a lot of things like that I would like to get into. I
Yeah.
would love to provide a subscription service through my website where
Yeah.
I send you 4 bottles of honey every 4 months,
Yeah.
something along those lines, because shipping would be more affordable for me, and
Yeah.
you get it whether you remember it or not, which is good for me. You don't have to remember to go to the grocery store when you run
Yeah.
out and all that stuff. So there's some things like that that I'm looking for or looking at, but this year is going to be painful. Um, I don't have the income potential this year that I really need, and I've got the ability and honestly
Yeah.
the need to spend everything I can make this year.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be a tough year. Next year should begin to get a little better, but
Yeah.
I tell you, I'll be praying for good weather the next 2 years. I
Yeah.
really will.
Yeah. Bob talks about that. He's like, I sell bees every year because that's what pays off loans. He's like, that's the consistent income. What regardless of the weather, that's what I'm going to make my money on. I can hang my hat on that. And you're playing, even though I know from your videos you said you're not taking out any loans, you're just investing what you take out of the business back in. But there's just, there's always a certain amount of risk to it.
Well, some people may find this interesting. I'll talk
Yeah.
about this for a couple minutes. I was an agricultural loan officer for 8 years at a
Yep.
major ag lender, so I understand that world pretty well.
Yeah.
And I am generally very anti-debt, um,
Yeah.
uh, until you get to a point where not having debt is costing you money.
Yeah.
And Bob is at that point. There's a lot of big commercial producers that are at that
Yeah.
point. Like if you don't have any leverage, you're not making as much as you could be making.
Yeah.
But in my situation, where I'm growing from nothing to something to a little bit more of a something to,
Yeah.
this is beginning to get to where it's a considerable amount of money to hopefully, wow, that's a pretty good income there. Then you can start taking out truck payments and buildings and
Yeah.
things like that. But I'm at the stage where I'm like, one bad year, and I
Yeah.
don't know if I could make all these payments or not. I don't have a 3-year
Yeah.
average to look at, and
Yeah.
I've got this financial analysis brain that I wouldn't make myself a loan based on my business. you
Yeah.
know, and if I wouldn't have made that loan when I was a loan officer, I'm like, I don't want
Yeah.
to take out that loan.
Yeah.
Um, but one thing that I have done, my wife and I are thankfully have got good credit. So
Yeah.
every year or every 18 months or 22 months, I will take out a credit card. A lot of people say don't do this, but we've got good credit. So I'll find a credit card that does 18 months, 0% interest on
Yeah.
purchases. And I'll run the limit up on beekeeping equipment and put it in the safe and let it sit there. And
Yeah.
I've got cash in the bank to pay it off, but I let it sit there at 0% interest. And then that allows me, I use it like an operating line of credit or a term
Yeah.
debt that allows me to extend my cash a little bit further. So that's something that I do. I do have some debt, but I've got the money to pay it off. So
Yeah.
working capital is sort of neutral.
Yeah. LaGrange bees. I have similar issues. I'm in an apartment, so storage is a huge issue for me. The only solution I can think of is converting to an enclosed trailer into a honey house. Problem is the price. So I opted to grow to 30 hives instead, and this will generate a bit of income and maybe enough to get that trailer for next year.
You might look at a food service truck if you could find one for sale because they're already set up and they're inspected.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
I
I
mean,
I
maybe.
don't know if you could do that. I thought about having a like a mobile extraction
Yeah.
van or something, but I think that
Yeah.
would be a lot more complicated with the plumbing and stuff than what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely heard of them. They definitely exist. I don't know if
Hmm.
there are any of them in Maine, but I definitely heard of them in Texas, I think. And I'm not familiar with plumbing or electricity at all. And it's not like they're, spouting off on Instagram about the nitty gritty details in that. But
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. It is interesting, and like speaking, like we're talking about the niche markets. I feel like that's one of the big variables in each person's beekeeping business. Like Gus, he's like, I can sell a lot of comb honey. That's where my market is. I live near Memphis. That's what I can do really well. And like
Yeah.
for me here, I may not average, 110 pounds per hive, but I've got infinite amount of tourists that if I set up a, some kind of hive tour system, if I find the right piece of land to take people out to, I can make a ton of meat. There'd be endless demand for that because there's endless amounts of tourism during the summer.
Yeah.
And it's just how do you leverage that niche market? How do you find it? And, I haven't done that
Well,
yet, but I hope to.
pick your own watermelons is going to be a lot more popular than pick your own honey. So
Yeah.
if you're doing agritourism with bees, you better make sure you got some gentle bees and
Oh
some
yeah,
good
no.
liability insurance.
Yeah, no. That's the reason why I haven't pursued it yet is mostly because of liability. I mean,
Yeah.
it's I've given
Commercial liability insurance is actually really cheap. If you can
yeah,
find somebody that will quote it for you, it's
yeah.
actually really, really cheap.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. I do have gentle bees. That is, I mean, my bees aren't, I wear a suit and whatnot, but I mean, they're not that aggressive. I got stung once 12 times in a day, but that was because, a thunderstorm was less than a minute away and it was starting to sprinkle. So
Yeah.
it's the vast majority of the time I don't have any problems. I've only ever had like one hive that I would say is really mean, maybe two. And out of my 18, I'd say the stock's all pretty gentle. So and with hive tours, I've given them to like friends, and you just go in there, at the right time of day, at the right hive, and make sure all the conditions are right, and it normally works out.
Yeah. My problem is I've got one stand in one yard, and one or two of those hives follow me for the
Yeah,
whole yard, but I haven't figured out which hive it is yet. They just appear and then they follow me the whole yard. So I
yeah.
gotta weed those guys. I gotta weed those girls out.
I've never dealt with anything like that. My idea of a really mean hive is once you get it open, they're pretty aggressive. But I've never had a hive that will like. I mean, like they'll chase me if they're really angry on a certain day, but never like I walk up to the hive, stand in I'm 3 hives away, and then the hive just swarm of bees comes after me. They're
No,
pretty chill.
it's never like that for me.
No, no,
We're not in an AHB area.
yeah.
They don't live here, but some of those crusty old guard bees, they will remember me for 3 or 4 weeks. Like if I show up at the yard, they smell me and they know my scent. Even if somebody's with me, they come after me because they know that I've done things to them that they don't like.
I had I had a nightmare situation. I was like the cinder blocks were kind of like a little bit tippy because of the mud and the constant freezing and thawing. And so I was trying to slip a hive off the stand to, make sure that, and then, flatten out the spot. And then a month later when it was warmer, I'd move them back up on there. And so as I was trying to slide it off, the hive just tipped over and it had a wrap on it. So the two boxes
Mm,
were connected and they fell, off the ground and got separated from the bottom board. Anyways, this hive had been a really nice hive the summer before. And uh, a few weeks later, maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, they were very kind again. But for those 2 or 3 weeks after I tipped them over and made them fly everywhere in, I think it was March 13th of 2020, actually. And you could tell their behavior had radically changed. Like it definitely made a big difference that had happened.
you put a generational stress on them. They remember you.
Yeah. So, but after a few weeks, they're back to the normal, very calm, kind bees.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful for that. But yeah, it's gentle bees are one of the biggest things I'm breeding for. Like what I'm looking for this spring is I'm looking at the colonies that are like I want that Carniolan Caucasian kind of Russian, you know, very frugal in the winter, meaning saves me a lot on the feed bill in the fall, and then once they get to spring, they just explode. And hopefully, like I've got about 2 hives that I'm really looking at. One of them really light last fall, or really light, somewhat light, and because I fed them a ton,
Yeah.
and they got up to weight, and that wasn't really their fault. Like I had a weird thing with a medium super that I ended up harvesting. They were, average weight for the time. And when I looked in them, they're like covering about half the box. And considering, 2 months plus till swarm season, that's pretty big for this time of year. And they were one of the heaviest hives that I have at my house. And so even though they were one of the lightest going into the fall, into the now in the spring, they're one of the biggest, and two, also one of the most frugal, and I could see the capped honey and feel the weight of the back of the hive.
It's interesting. You say what you're breeding for. So last fall I was at 38 hives, and that wasn't as many as I wanted, because I hadn't done any queen rearing because my mom passed. But anyway, I ended up buying 5 mated queens from a breeder out of state. He's very well known. I'm not going to name him because I don't think this is his fault. But I bought those 5 queens. I made 5 nukes, and I thought I made them pretty strong because we were late in the year. It was August or September already. And one of them just never took. So I lost one right off the bat. So I had 4 nukes. And as of now, I believe I have 38 of 38 of my hives that made it through winter and are good, and 2 of 5 of those out-of-state queens that made it and are good. So, I say I had 42 and I'm down to 40. Well, all of my losses came from those out-of-state queens. So the thing I'm really breeding for is a tough bee that will survive here. And then on top of that, I'm looking for other stuff. I think you are too. You're in Maine.
I mean, I don't have much of a choice. Ian
Stepler is in Miami, Manitoba. He's got to have bees that can survive his winters, and then he can start looking for other traits as well. So, and here it's different. Like, we don't have the cold, but we've got wet. The hives are so wet when you open them up. Even now, they won't be dry until May. There's just condensation all the time on these things. So, and the bees I've got do well with it. They really do.
Yeah, I do see some condensation in mine as well. But I feel like, for me, I don't have to breed that much. I'm breeding on top of the winters. Because my bees, like we talked about earlier, they're not flying, most years from November till, they may fly a couple days in March, but mostly till April. And like, that frugality is so important because, no matter how much I feed my hives and what kind of bee, I'm gonna be feeling a little nervous because I really care. But if I can have that headache taken away, and the bees also, I have to feed them less during the summer dearth that we get. I mean, I can't imagine the amount of money that I would save. I mean, it'd be a lot of money. Like, because I fed 600 pounds and I only had 18 colonies. Some years we just get zero fall flow. There's just nothing. And so when I have to feed that much, it's worth the money because I don't have, if I feed well enough in that fall, I don't have to feed till, next summer or next fall. But if I'm able to get a bee that, means I have to feed them less in the fall because they eat less over winter and they already have more in the nest, I mean, that seems like a no-brainer. And especially because I'm not doing anything early in the spring, so it's not a big deal for me. So I think I was going to finish out on one last topic tonight, Nathan. So I hadn't seen much about plantings for bees other than, like people who say, I want to save the bees or help the bees. And, there's a chart of flowers, but you get really specific in a very helpful way, especially for beekeepers to do that.
I think it's Shannon Trimboli talks a lot about this in her book, and I forget the title of it. It's like one of those big long titles. Plants honeybees use in the Tennessee Valley or something like that. And she basically says that, like, I'm going to use my flows here because that's what I know best. So crimson clover is a good bee plant. The problem for me is it blooms at exactly the same time as tulip poplar. And tulip poplar is one of our major flows. So if tulip poplar is blooming and black locust is blooming at the same time, and then your crimson clover that you planted blooms, the bees are not going to work the crimson clover hardly at all. So you would be much better off finding something to plant that will bloom when your majors are not blooming.
Yeah.
And for me, we get a major flow from late April when black locust hits, and
Yeah.
then we get into tulip poplar, and the month of May is usually really good. And then it'll shut down some. And in June, late June to July, we can get sumac and sourwood. And then
Yep.
after that, it's basically nothing until September. So I've planted buckwheat for years. It's a wonderful plant.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. And the reason that I've planted it for years is we do food plots. My dad's a big hunter, and
Yeah.
he's older and he's got rheumatoid arthritis. So and of course he's lost my mom as well. So to give him something to do in the fall, I
Yeah.
plant food plots, and he's got some hunting houses he can go sit in every day and watch the deer. He doesn't shoot many anymore, but he watches
Yeah.
them a lot and takes pictures and stuff.
Yeah.
And to get the food plots ready, it's a whole lot easier if you're not if you don't have a ton of equipment. If you plant buckwheat in May,
Yeah.
then it'll go to bloom within 30 to 45 days. It'll go to seed. You can disc it and get another flowering crop in.
Yep.
And then you disc it again, and it's a cover crop. So it breaks up the soil, suppresses weeds, and it's a green manure crop. So when you disc it that last time, you immediately go into your fall food plot, and it is exceedingly easy to work up at that time. Instead of it being clogged up with fescue and Bermuda grass that you have to chisel plow and spray with glyphosate and all this mess, or plow it, then all you have to do is disc it again, and it's super easy to put that fall food plot in. And you've gotten 2 flowering crops during the summer for your bees, and at least one of them has been during a dearth period. And if you've never worked bees during a Tennessee dearth, they're pissy. They're really pissy. So if you can give them 3 or 4 acres of buckwheat to just go and work, even if they're not getting much from it, it's just a morale boost for them. They've got something to do. It's also really neat. It's very good for hummingbird moths, which are one of my favorite critters. I love those things. And then the monarchs and all the butterflies hit the buckwheat as well. So it's worth doing if anybody wants to. One thing I would like to get going here, I planted some sweet clover a few years ago, but it never took off, and I'm not sure why. If I had the wrong cultivar or what. If anybody knows a good seed source for yellow and white sweet clover for Middle Tennessee, then I would love to know it, because I would love to get some growing.
Yeah. Well, do you know when that would bloom? Or I mean, I guess just depends on when you, or depends on when you plant it.
July. June to July.
So you think that wouldn't overlap with your flow, or you think they would just really like it anyways?
Not
much.
We get a decent sumac flow. Sourwood, we've got quite a bit of sourwood, especially in old clear cuts and stuff. But I'm at about 700 feet elevation, and Bob told me that sourwood for really good honey production needs to be at about 1,800 to 2,200 feet elevation. So we get some, and I can taste it in the honey house. Like, I'll get a frame, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's sourwood right there.
Yeah.
I know it is, but I don't get enough of it to really produce a varietal. At least not at this point.
Do you ever think you'll be able to just throw those frames in a box and then eventually harvest it, or do you think it'll just be too much hassle and it won't be worth it?
I would like to chase it. I really would. Like I've got 2 new bee yards this year that are close to clear cuts that are 7, 8 years old. Sourwood is a real small tree. It's an understory tree.
Yeah.
And it grows very crooked. In some of the timber books, they used to use sourwood to make sled runners for horse-drawn sleighs, because the sourwood trunks are always twisted and crooked. So when they clear cut hardwood forests, it lets light down into the understory trees that they leave behind, which is sourwood. And then sourwood also likes disturbed sites. So you get a bunch of new sourwood growing up in these clear cuts, and they just bloom really good.
Yeah.
around those areas. So I've got 2 bee yards that are around those sorts of areas, and if we get a really good bloom, I would actually move hives in there and then target it with fresh supers and just see what it pulls off. You may get sumac because they grow together,
Yeah.
but you may
It's worth it.
may get some sourwood honey. It really is
Yeah.
good. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Bob says, he said, I can't remember if it was more than half like of people when they go into a shop, they taste all the honeys. They're like, sourwood's the best out of all of them.
Yeah, I've had some doggone good honey, I tell you. Um, Knapweed from the Woosner brothers in Missoula, Montana is still my favorite. Knapweed,
Missoula.
purple star thistle. It was completely crystallized. There was
Yeah.
this little market. I forget what it was called, something on Maine, and I bought several bottles there and smuggled it through the airport coming back home. It
Yeah.
was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely, my son is one of the pickiest eaters I know, and he would eat that stuff off a spoon, just like candy. It was crazy.
What can you just give any descriptive words to it?
And white, white crystallized, extremely finely crystallized.
Yeah.
Uh, just the right balance of floral sweetness and
Yeah.
just just a delightful honey in every way. Not
Yeah.
too strong, but strong enough. Just absolutely delightful.
Well, I mean, it's funny. Like I don't think my honey's bad by any means, but I don't feel like I don't feel like it's one of the best honeys I've ever tasted or anything. It's I mean, I feel like all honeys are incredibly sweet, but mine has a more floral. It's pretty light. It's like I'm not talking like basswood white, but if you go dark to light scale, I think mine would be about pretty close to dead center middle. It's not
Hmm.
dark, but it's not light, and it's like very sugary. I guess floral. I probably should take a honey tasting class so I can talk up my honey
Yeah.
better. Um, but it was really interesting this year because I had one yard where I split them pretty hard, so I didn't expect much honey. But the three colonies made, I don't know, maybe 40, 35, 40 pounds, close to that. And I left it in the hives for a really long time. And so by the time I harvested it, it was pretty much all capped. It was all about, I don't know, 15 or 15.5%.
I get capped honey here that's at 19.5%. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So like for me, like I don't really worry about the honey if the honey's capped or not. I have a refractometer, so I just test the outside frames in the super. And so if that's good, I'll just take it. Anyways, so when I was, I pulled that honey off and I was trying to harvest it. And I was trying to like, leave more honey in the bottom of my extractor to see if that would help balance it better. I try to
Mhm.
balance the frames, but I thought, maybe that's worth a try. Maybe it'll help a little bit. And the honey was so thick and it got so high that it almost started to cream in the bottom.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah. And so, anyways, the interesting part about that honey was it was a completely different flavor than my yard. So my house is probably 10 minutes away from that. And then my house is 10 minutes away from both of my apiaries, and my other two apiaries are 10 minutes away from each other. It's kind of like almost a triangle. And the ones that they made at the Goranson yard, and I call it like Birch Hill, completely different flavor than the ones they made at my house. My mom's like, I don't like the one you made here, but the ones there, that's pretty good. It's
Yeah.
they were the exact same color, looked exactly the same, but one was 2% thicker, and then also just completely different flavor.
Yeah, it's super cool. I've had 2 different colors of honey on the same frame.
Yeah,
I had one bucket last year that I tagged,
yeah,
put some painter's tape on it and wrote on it. Ended up dumping it in the uh, bottling tank with everything else, but boy, it was good. It was super good. I think it was sumac sourwood.
yeah.
Had something else in it. I don't know what it was. It was almost spicy.
Hmm.
Um, it was very interesting. Really, really interesting. But yeah, honeys are really. I I have a lot of fun tasting and collecting different honeys. I came away
Yeah.
from hive life with an entire milk crate full of honey, and
Yeah.
my kids and I sat around with toothpicks just testing every one of them.
Yeah.
It was super cool. There were some really good ones too.
Yeah.
But I gotta say that my honey is, and being completely honest, this is not biased. I gotta say that my honey is very well balanced. It's probably one of my, I'd say it's in my top 5.
Yeah. Do you notice any difference between yards, or do you just not able to separate it?
Not a ton because we've got so many hardwood sources,
Yeah.
and the hardwood trees don't change that much.
Yeah.
So it's going to be black locust, maple. We got a ton of maples. Maple's actually blooming right now. Even the hard maples are blooming right now. A soft maple's been blooming for a while.
Yeah.
And then we'll go to um, uh, black locust, and then tulip poplar, persimmons, and just lots and lots of different hardwood
Yeah.
species, shrubs, and things like that. We don't have a lot of row crops or even pasture land with
Yeah.
overgrown stuff. Don't have a lot of legumes anymore. We do have a lot of white Dutch clover, but we're not in a soil type where it bears well every year.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a lot of similarities between yards, but I do notice differences too.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. And honey is an infinite world of differences, and it's fascinating. I mean, the bees are fascinating among themselves, and there's just so many components that go on to that, and one of them is honey.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm very thankful that you came on tonight. I think it was a great chat, and I love watching your channel, and I'll continue to do so. So thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Had fun. Really have. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. I hope you have a good night, Nathan. I'm going to sign off here.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.